In a game, you have the opportunity to sort of create your own narrative and create your own journey. The most exciting aspect for me is the fact that you can take what you've enjoyed and loved and you can build your own stories and your own places. And that to me is the ultimate goal, is to have, complete control.
Using Unreal 5 to create a game is obviously one of the better choices. Unreal 5 gives us flexibility through the blueprinting system. It allows us to handle amazing graphics through the rendering system, the lighting system such as Lumen. Lumen technology allows proper light bouncing. If I had to say one thing in the game that really benefits from Lumen, it's player crafted spaces. In our case, it's like you build a room and you place a window, and the window lets in natural light, and the light will fill the room in a way that feels real. And that technology hasn't existed before. Before Unreal 5, in the olden days, you had to use what we called the LOD system. And that meant that you had to create assets at different LOD levels, so it doesn't slow down everybody's computer. With Unreal 5, we have this new technology called nanite that breaks things down into the right amount of polygons at the right distance. So for us, as a company, this has made an amazing difference to the visual detail of the world. It allows us to create one really amazing looking cliff piece, for example, and then doesn't matter how far away or how close we place it, it performs well and it looks great.
Where Unreal worked for us on Dune was that it was a fantastic pre-production and planning tool. On Dune Part 2, we had some very complicated scenes, and we were able to previs all the way from Budapest what the light was going to be doing well in advance. It's the only tool that I've used, I would say, in my 25 years of shooting that is able to be used across a wide spectrum of films by different types of filmmakers.
The most iconic creature in the Dune universe is the sandworm of Arrakis. And so we've tried to represent this in the game in multiple ways. So as a player, your first steps on the open sand, you hear the hiss of the sand in the distance as the sandworm begins to move towards you. And when it gets close, you hear the roar as it erupts from the sand nearby. And at that point, you have only seconds to live if you cannot make it to rocky ground. So this is your first experience with sandworms. And these are the little ones. When you go into the deep desert, when you're harvesting spice, the giant ringmouth sandworms that we've seen in the film will erupt underneath the spice blows and suck harvesters and equipment down into the sand beneath them. There's really only one rule. The sandworm will always come. Humans have always had this innate drive to create something, to build worlds, whether it's in their head, whether it's in text, whether it's on screens, whether it's in games. Funcom as a company has been on this journey for a long time, creating multiplayer worlds where players can live out their dreams and fantasies. We were there in the beginning with massively multiplayer online games. We've been there in the beginning with survival open world crafting games. And Dune is a combination of those legacies, bringing us forward into the future. It's the culmination of what Funcom means as a company and what we can deliver. And this legacy means that we need to really pay attention to what we're creating and how we create it for the fans. Because I think at the heart of this, there's a lot of people out there who really want to live in the universe that Frank Herbert created. And they really want to live in the visual world of the films that they see from Villeneuve. And so we need to create the gap between those two possibility spaces and create a game world where people can live out their fantasies that they've taken from Dune. And yes, it's a huge legacy, and it feels at times extremely overwhelming, but we really hope that we can deliver something for everybody. like a train coming into the station that doesn't stop. You just jam on the brakes and let the sparks fly into people's imagination. Arrakis is a test, is what the Fremen say. And the player comes right into the heart of that test. Dune Awakening is a survival game at the base level. And it begins like a traditional survival game, you know, like you're looking for water, you're looking for shelter. You know, where will you find water in the desert? Will you take it from others? So when we talk about survival, sure, we start with the basic kind of survive. And then when you've survived long enough, it's now time to think about political survival and how you progress within the universe. The approach we take when building a world like Arrakis is we kind of have to think about where are the stark lines and how do we draw these epic spaces? How do we make them feel huge and the player feels dwarfed by everything they see around them?
The intention was every time we saw the desert, it was highly brutal, and if you went out into the desert without the right protection and without the right knowledge, that it was sure death. If we looked at references from some of the hottest deserts in the world, the visuals that we saw from those deserts weren't enough. We needed this world to be even harsher.
So we've been working with Legendary since the very beginning. They've been very generous with sharing with us assets from the film and allowing us to see things from the film and allowing us to really understand the vision that Denis Villeneuve has for the world and his characters and the way he's grounding Arrakis. But of course, a game is a much larger scale, so we need to expand upon that vision. We have our own army of concept artists who are sending things back and forth with Legendary all the time. One of my best moments on this project so far actually was I got to go and visit the set of the first film with a group of the people from Funcom, the art directors, the lead artists, and we got to walk around in the actual sets that they had built in classic old school set building, massive palaces, and we got to look at the ornithopters from the inside and the outside, right? We got to walk around them and get a sense of their scale.
Well, I think what they had done really well is they'd been quite inspired by the world that we had built in Dune Part 1. Now, on a film, you're sort of led on a journey by the director and by the script, whereas
Arrakis is a test. Few survive it. Arrakis is a test. Few survive it. But the humans that do awaken.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over and through me.
starts in the desert. You cling to life. You find others, friends. You wander the dry, dirty streets of civilization. In the ancient halls of the testing stations, you find answers. You seek the secrets of the ever-shifting sands. Spice. You do all of these things in my dream, Sleeper. I am terrified of what happens when you awake.
It is a game where players are invited to explore the world of Dune. They involve themselves in politics, they involve themselves in intrigue, they involve themselves in combat, they have to survive on the most dangerous planet in the universe. And through this experience, they come to know the factions in the world and the universe. So when Dune Awakening begins, you are a castaway on the planet in the deep desert, and all you have is a knife that you've made out of scrap metal. And you need to creep into enemy camps and knife them in the back and steal the water from their stilsons. By the end of the game, perhaps you're running a guild. You have a fleet of vehicles, ornithopters flying in formation, sandbikes cruising across the desert beneath them, tanks kicking up a cloud of dust as you drive to a spice blow in the distance in order to harvest with your guild. And you see in the distance another guild coming towards you, and just as you clash, you hear the rumble of a sandworm coming. That's combat in Dune Awakening.
My name is Viljar Sommerbach. I'm the game director on Dune Awakening. You start out in the desert, surviving, clinging to life, and in the end, you might become someone like the Baron Harkonnen, and then you try to cling to power. Arrakis is the most dangerous planet in the universe. Surviving on Arrakis means that you need to prepare for sandstorms, you need to find water, it's a constant threat against survival. Water discipline is an important part of survival. In the beginning, it might just be water for yourself. In the end, you might need industrial levels of water because you have industrialized your base. And the storms are an important part of survival as well. You have to find shelter in the beginning, you have nothing to your name. After a while you will have a base, and then you will build a bigger base, so that doesn't become as important. But then you always have to go out in the desert and make sure that you can compete against the desert. In the end, you might even be riding the storms of the desert to actually gain access to unique resources. But you always need to return, and every time you go out, you have to be careful of the worm. Because if you get caught by the worm, there will be nothing left of you, and you will leave nothing behind.
With Dune, we have a particular focus on a style of combat that we like to call combined arms, and it takes all of the elements that players would expect from the books and the movies, and it puts them together in this great chaotic kind of experience. So we have vehicle combat, we have abilities that you might see in the great schools in the Dune universe, we have melee combat, and we have range combat, and all of these things work together to create both player versus environment, PvE kind of combat, as well as massive PvP battles for players to participate in. And it's the combination of these things that really makes it feel like sandbox combat, where players have the ability to, pick their loadouts and see how they go into battle.
We have a broad spectrum of combat capabilities. We have melee weapons like knives and swords. We have range weapons. Then we have ground vehicles and air vehicles. They all come with configurable capabilities like lasguns, rockets, miniguns, things like that. You will be fighting on foot, you'll be driving vehicles, you'll be flying in ornithopter, and it all comes together there. The more coordinated you are, the better it is, the better prepared you are, the better it will be. If you're playing with someone for the first time or you didn't prepare properly, it will be chaotic, but if you prepare, if you coordinate, then you will perform with lethal efficiency.
So, the world of Arrakis is full of political intrigue, and we have this fantastic concept from the stories called Canley. And Canley is basically the rules of engagement. It's this thing called the Great Convention that defines areas of the world where players are allowed to interact in different ways. So in Dune Awakening, players will have different areas of the world that are enabled for example, full player versus player combat, and areas that are safer and that are patrolled by Sardaukar troops and kept safe. And so players really have this sort of free opportunity within the sandbox to find the locations where they can fight with each other, or to stay in the locations where they're safer, right? And that's up to the player and how they want to approach the game. In Dune Awakening, we've got many different types of weapons from across the universe, drawing upon the books and the movies. We have las guns, Mauler pistols, we have scatter guns, pellet guns. In addition, we have all of the sort of melee weapons you'd expect to see, Chris knives and kinjals and short swords and rapiers. And in addition to that, of course, we also have abilities that players can learn through the great schools of the universe, such as Mentat abilities or Bene Gesserit skills. You can fight other players wearing Holtzman shields. There's a system involved where people will want to get close because the slow blade penetrates. And so you want to use melee to get through a shield in a duel like that. And of course, like if people don't have shields, because shields draw the sandworm, you want to make sure that you use ranged weapons. So there's a real interplay between systems, between the way that shields interact with both the world and the environment with sandworms, and also how they interact in close personal combat. Anytime that you step onto the sands of Arrakis, you risk drawing a worm. You can multiply that by driving vehicles on the surface. You can multiply that by using shields or suspensor belts. Holtzman technology will draw the worm. Dune Awakening is built upon a foundation of 5 pillars. Survival, which is obviously everything you'd expect to see in a survival game. It's water discipline, it's the surviving the sandstorms that sweep across Arrakis. Then we have politics and intrigue, which speaks to the faction gameplay of the game. It's about, siding with one of the factions, thinking about how they work together, perhaps assassinating members of the other factions. Then there's infinite exploration. Infinite exploration, which is one of the things I'm most excited about, is how the world changes over time. We have a concept called a Coriolis storm, and when it sweeps across the landscape, the sands shift, revealing new points of interest, hiding others, making the game renewed every week. Then we have combined arms. Combined arms is our combination of vehicles, melee combat, range combat, and abilities all working together to create a seamless sandbox combat experience. And finally, we have expression and customization, which is really more than just talking about like the visual expression and customization, which of course we have armor sets and clothing and a robust character creation. But in addition to that, it's really about play the way you want to play. Do you want to be a trader? You can do that. Do you want to be a fighter? Of course you can do that. Do you want to be a spy? Maybe that's the gameplay you're looking for. All of these things built into these pillars.
So Anarchy Online, when we started, Anarchy Online was a huge undertaking for Funcom at the time. We didn't always know what we were doing, but we were learning on the job to a large extent. As Funcom now has a long track record of MMOs, we're not new when it comes of challenges relating to server technology, to relating to player population balancing, with relating to the RPG aspects of it. So everything that went into the earlier MMOs that we did comes into play here. We are taking it a lot further though, because we're not a traditional MMO in the sense that there's combat in our game is much more second to second and intense than you would find in an MMO, for instance. It's much based on the second to second experience, how melee, how ranged, how gadgets and abilities, how ground vehicles, how air vehicles, how it comes together in the ultimate challenge that is getting spice.
In Dune Awakening, PvP is about large-scale competition and small-scale competition. Players in guilds competing for spice resources in the world Now, PvP can be done on many levels between players, right? It doesn't necessarily mean players killing players. It can also be players out intriguing other players, finding ways to give them false information, tricking them into going to the wrong area to look for a spice block, or perhaps like misleading them into looking in an enemy base for the